I'm Joseph Kiernan, the interim university provost, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to the Metropolitan Campus as our UN Pathways program continues into its 8th year. Tonight we have a special treat for you. We have a very interesting ambassador, and actually two of them. For those of you that are veterans of the UN Pathways program, our format this evening is going to be a little different than in past years. In past years, we asked the ambassador to make comments and then field questions pretty much on his own. And tonight what we will be doing is a panel question and answer discussion between two ambassadors, one former ambassador, one sitting ambassador, followed by the opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions. So it'll be a little different. We're trying something, make it a little bit more interesting. It's my pleasure to introduce our two speakers this evening. The first one actually needs no introduction to fans of the UN Pathways program. He is our own Ambassador Ahmad Kamal. Just by way of introduction and telling you something about that, Ambassador Kamal is a member of the United Nations Advisory Committee on Administrative and Budgetary Questions and continues to be a senior fellow of the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. A lifelong diplomat, Ambassador Kamal has served as a professional diplomat in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan for close to 40 years, until his retirement in 1999. During this period, he held diplomatic postings in India, Belgium, France, the Soviet Union, Saudi Arabia, the Republic of Korea, and the United Nations, both in Geneva and in New York. During his decade-long assignment as ambassador and permanent representative of Pakistan to the United Nations, he held many of the highest elective posts: Vice President of the General Assembly, President of the Economic and Social Council, Chairman of the Consultations on the Role of NGOs at the United Nations, Chairman of the Working Group on Informatics, and Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. He was the chief negotiator of Pakistan in the Uruguay round negotiations, which led to the establishment of the World Trade Organization. He is the author of important publications on disarmament, management, multilateralism, global economic issues, and on technical aspects of informatics and information technology. He's an honorary visiting professor at a number of universities in the United States and is a member of the Fairleigh Dickinson University Board of Trustees. Our special guest this evening is Ambassador Bashar Jaafari, who is the permanent ambassador or permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to the United Nations. Ambassador Jaafari began his career in the Syrian Arab Republic Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1980. He has held positions in the Syrian Embassy in France and Indonesia, as well as the United Nations office in Geneva, Switzerland. In 2006, he was sworn in as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic to the United Nations headquarters in New York. Ambassador Jaafari holds doctoral degrees in political science from the University of Sceaux in Paris and the University of Paris La Sorbonne in France. The ambassador received a third doctoral degree in the history of Islamic civilization in Southeast Asia from the University of Sharif Hidayatullah in Jakarta, Indonesia. His bachelor's degree in French literature was earned at the University of Damascus in Syria. He is fluent in Arab, French, English, and Persian, and I presume he'll be speaking in English this evening. I present Ambassador Kamal and Ambassador Jaafari for our UN Pathways.
Ambassador Jaafari, it's a pleasure to welcome you at Fairleigh Dickinson University. You come to us from Syria, And since most of us here are Americans, and Americans are known for their ignorance about geography, we are not quite sure where Syria is. What we do know is that you are somehow in the eye of the storm, and that you are, to put it very simply, that you are trouble, and that you are a troublemaker. And so start by giving us, first of all, a lesson in history, because Syria is, after all, part of an empire. You were the Umayyad Empire, and you were, in other words, the center of the Muslim world for a long period of time. And then you got overtaken by the Turks and became a part of the Ottoman Empire. And then in the beginning of the last century, in 1916, in this conspiracy which took place between the French and the British, and which is called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, they decided to carve up this whole area. You controlled what is today Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. All this was you. And then the French and the British came and decided to cut you up into the north and the south. And that's how you lost half of the country to Jordan, half or a part to Lebanon, ultimately to Israel, etc. And so the first question, sir, that I would like to ask you is, how does the history of Syria impact the thinking process of the people of Syria? How do the Syrians see themselves? Do they see themselves as children of an empire? Or do they see themselves as a very small pimple which remains on the face of the Middle East? What is, in other words, Syrianness from the point of view of the Syrian population? You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, Ambassador Ahmed Kamal. Thank you very much, Mr. Provisor. Thanks a lot for your kind invitation. I really appreciate your presence with us today. I hope we will have some fun mixed with politics, the way Ambassador Ahmed likes to do it always. There is an Arab saying, I like it very much. And it says in Arabic, Al-insanu adu ma yajhal. 3 words in Arabic, but it will take me some while to translate it into English. It says something like, we human beings, we malign things and persons in order of our ignorance of them. So Ambassador Ahmed was right when he started his introductory speech by making reference to this key word, ignorance. In spite of living in this 21st century, I feel, honestly speaking, that our ancestors were much more knowledgeable persons than what we are today. 1,000 years ago, the international relationship witnessed some kind of an early globalization era. And that globalization era went on very smoothly in the world. There were peaceful trade links between peoples, between nations, in spite, of course, of wars. But let us take, for instance, the case of the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean, for almost 1,000 years, did not witness any war until the Portuguese and the Netherlands fleet came to that area of the world. The first battle in the Ocean Indian took place something around 1509 between the Portuguese and a sultanate, very famous sultanate in what is in our present day Singapore, Malaysia and Singapore. A sultanate that used to be called Malacca. And from where comes the name of the Strait of Malacca, between Indonesia, the island of Sumatra, and Malaysia, and Singapore. And where, currently speaking, 40% of the international trade passes through this strait, Malacca Strait, which is very close to Aceh, actually. If somebody ever heard about Aceh in Indonesia, it is very close to Indonesia. What I'm saying is that it's true. Ignorance is the worst enemy of all humankind, a human being. And we should do our best to be better known by each other. Living among you in America gave me many reasons to think that these misunderstandings, accumulation of misunderstandings actually, vis-à-vis many nations in the world, should be ended. But to be ended, we have to have such dialogues from time to time to explain ourselves and to dissipate any misconception and misinterpretation. Syria, historically speaking, gave to the Roman Empire 4 emperors. 4 Roman emperors came from Syria. One of them was a woman. One of these 4 emperors was a woman. At the same time, the first rebellion against the Roman Empire came from Syria also, from Palmyra, a Syrian princess named Zenobi. She was a woman also, and she undertook the first armed rebellion against the Roman Empire because of injustice inflicted to her people at that time. That happened something around 200 years after Jesus, AC, AD. Syria is the land of 33 civilizations. This is why the archaeologists, every time they dig in our land, they find out something astonishing. This is why we still don't have any subway in Damascus, because we cannot dig. If we do it, we will hit civilizations underground. We are very rich in history. Ambassador Ahmad Kamal is right when he says that, currently speaking, Syria may have the size of one of the United States, one of these 51 states. But we are proud of what we are. We are proud of what we are, and that may be the key of understanding the Syrian mentality. We have been treated unjustly by the European colonialist powers, namely speaking, France and Britain. And the paradox is that at the Conference of Paris on 1919, the Syrian representative at this conference, who used to be someone named Prince Faisal, Prince Faisal at that conference, when he got the picture from the Russian at that time, that the British and the French were conspiring against the Middle East in order to divide it into protectorate, and that Syria would go to the French mandate and Iraq to the British, plus Egypt, and then Palestine at that time, they agreed together, the French and the British, to put it under international control. actually Jerusalem at that time, they agreed to put it under international control, but Palestine should go to the British rule. When the Syrian representative at that conference understood what was going on between the French and the British, he asked to put Syria under an American mandate. And I am sure none of you knows this fact. He talked to President Wilson, who was present at that conference, and asked him to save Syria by putting Syria rather under an American mandate and not under French or British mandate. He did it because at that time President Wilson was very famous for issuing his 14 principles talking about the right of people to self-determination. And at that time, the Syrian diplomacy, at a very early stage, discovered the importance of having good relationship with the United States. At a time when the American diplomacy also was not involved in any international war. At a time when the US diplomacy was not encouraging any hegemonic or expansionist politics all over the world. At a time where the US was out of being involved in regional conflicts. Vietnam came later on. The Second World War came later on. So from that moment of the history, Syria tried to approach the United States with an open mind. We tried even to bring USA into the Middle East politics. But of course, you all know that the what we call the isolation tendency of the American diplomacy at that time was very strong, and that the American administration decided for some decades to keep USA away from international turbulences. And they were right. They were right. The misunderstanding between the Arabs in general, and then the Muslims also, on one side, and United States and the West started with the Palestinian question and the establishment of Israel in Palestine. This is where the conflict of interest started. And it grew up until we hit some degree of misunderstanding that we are trying on both sides now to reduce a little bit, gradually speaking. What we need actually, currently speaking, is stability, genuine peace, not any kind of peace, genuine peace that should be just and based on international law. And that means establishing a Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza with the borders of 67, and restituting the Syrian Golan to Syria, and having peace treaties between Israel and its neighbors. That could be achieved. This is achievable. This is achievable. And the only way to achieve this very noble objective and goal is by convincing politicians, especially within the American administration, that the American stand should be fair, genuine, and impartial, not taking side 100% in favor of the Israeli interests. Because a peace which is not genuine would not last. History has shown us that in order to safeguard the peace, it should be genuine, it should be just. And justice for us means that we accept to have a Palestinian state on only 22% of the historical size of Palestine. Please do not forget this figure. When we call for the establishment of the Palestinian state in West Bank and Gaza, that means we are giving up 80% of the historical size of Palestine to Israel. So this is how it is. This is a picture that should be very clear in the mind of everybody when we talk about peace. Syria is willing to re-engage in the peace process. We have been negotiating with the Israelis for 10 years after Madrid conference that started in 1991. There was a deal struck between us and George Bush, the father, at that time. In accordance to it, we participated at the liberation of Kuwait. We fought, our soldiers fought side by side with the American soldiers to liberate Kuwait from the Iraqi invasion, providing that the American administration would work out a peace deal with Israel to get back the Syrian Golan and to establish a Palestinian state. We have gone so far in this deal. We have almost achieved 90% of the deal with the Israelis along 10 years of negotiations. And for those who would like to know why this peace process stopped in the year 2000, I would refer you to the memoir of President Clinton, in which he elaborates what happened. Let me brief you about it. In the last round of negotiations in Y Plantation between Syrian and Israelis, we agreed both to go back to the capitals and to send within 10 days military delegations to Washington with maps in order to delineate the international border between Syria and Israel, which means the final step to strike a deal. What happened is that after 10 days, the Israeli did not send their military delegation to Washington, but we did. And when Clinton calls on Barak asking him why he didn't yet send the military delegation, the Israeli prime minister, who used to be Barak at that time, told Clinton, "I don't want to be assassinated like Rabin." That was his answer. And this is why we are still losing time and turning around this vicious cycle of violence in the area. Peace requires courage. If we don't have the courage, we cannot make peace.
Let me interrupt you there. Thank you. This is very interesting. I did not know that Syria had asked in 1919 that it should be placed under US mandate. And that's a very interesting fact now. But let me take you back. We'll come back to your foreign relations. I want to know a bit more about Syria. And I note that you have not answered my first question, but then that's the sign of a smart diplomat. Don't answer questions, answer something else. So let me try a second question. You have, in Syria, you have a political party which is called the Ba'ath Party. It's a long-living party. It's been there for a long, long time. It's almost a uni-party system. Is the Ba'ath Party a socialist party? Is it a fascist party? Is it a nationalist party? What type of party is it? What is its raison d'etre? And how do you, as a Frenchman like me, as a Frenchman, how do you react to the concept of a single party for so long? What are its objectives, and what do the Syrians think about it?
Well, thank you very much. Another important question, as usual, coming from Ahmed. The word Ba'ath means renaissance. It means reinvigorating the Arab nation. Textually speaking, this is what is the meaning of Ba'ath. Ba'ath also has a third meaning, which would be something like surviving through turmoils, or giving life to somebody who is almost dead. So it has many meanings, but all of them have a noble goal, which is to reinvigorate the energy of somebody. Ba'ath Party was born, officially speaking, was founded, officially speaking, on 1946. At that time, Syria got its independence from France. We were under colonial system for almost 30 years. France occupied Syria on 1920, right after the conference of Versailles, right after the conference of Versailles. When the conference collapsed, France and Britain implemented their secret agreements and they occupied the whole area. So between 1920 up to 1946, Syria was under colonial French rule. There were many Syrian revolutions against this French occupation until they left, and we obliged them to leave by force. But of course, we paid the price. They made us pay the price by dividing us, by cutting Syria into pieces, as Ambassador Ahmed said in his introductory speech. They created out of Syria what is now, in the present day, Lebanon, Jordan. Palestine used to be a district of Damascus, related to Damascus. And there is another detail that few people know, which is the northwest part of Iraq, western part of Iraq nowadays, used to be Syrian territory also. The city of Mosul, which is now in Kurdistan, the Kurdish part of Iraq, used to be part of Syria also. If we add to this the area which is now under Turkish rule, which is called Alexandrite and Kilikia, these two regions used to be part of Syria also. So the French, in order to gain the sympathy of Turkey, not to join the German in the Second World War, the French gave to Turkey this Alexandrite region of Syria. Of course, the issue of Palestine, you know a lot about it. The British opened the door of Palestine at that time to the Jewish immigration. France occupied Syria, and in the same year, France created what they used to call the Mount of Lebanon. It wasn't the current Lebanon. It was much smaller than what it is now. They used to call it the Mount of Great Lebanon. The idea for France at that time was to create a Christian country in the Middle East. The British wanted to have a Jewish homeland in Palestine. The French thought that they should create a Christian homeland in the Middle East. That was the main idea. Ignoring that, the three monotheist religions have lived in this area since Abraham, which means religion is, for us, an integral part of our daily life. And we know each other, and we do not fight with each other because of our religious identity. We have been there for thousands of years. The Syrian representative who signed San Francisco Agreement establishing the United Nations used to be a Christian, and he was Prime Minister of Syria. 1945. We had in Syria a Prime Minister, a Christian Prime Minister. So the religion is not an issue for us. It's not an issue, a conflictual issue, I mean. All this introductory speech is to explain to you why the Ba'ath Party was born. It was born because we felt at that moment of our history that we were too weak and that our nation needed something to raise the moral of the people, something to gather everybody around a theme, to build up our independence very strongly, and to confront another ideology in the area, which was the Zionist ideology at that time. Because I'm talking about 1946, only 2 years before the declaration of Israel as a state. But at that time, there were a huge turmoil in the area. So that was the meaning of, the message behind the creation of this Ba'ath Party. To be honest with you, I think that the West missed golden opportunities by not dealing with secular parties in the Arab world. And this is why the West now is somehow obliged to deal with fanatics. By not dealing with the secular regimes and secular parties, such as the Nasserism in Egypt and the Ba'athism in Syria and Iraq, the West missed golden opportunity and favored the creation of fanatic groups in the area. Because the only alternative to secularism is to have fanatics. And this is exactly what's happening right now. You cannot manipulate religion. Nobody can manipulate the religion. This is a very dangerous weapon. You start manipulating it, but one day it will kill you. This, we got it in our area. We know how important religions are in our area. This is why we don't use religions as weapon. Politics is something and religion is something else. Our people, the Arab world actually, got struck when we saw in the 40s the establishment of Israel on a pure religious basis. This country should be for the Jews only. We didn't understand it. We were struck. Why? Why the Syrian Jew should leave Syria and live in Palestine? Why the Moroccan Jewish community should immigrate from Morocco and go to Palestine? Why the Christians should live in Lebanon? Why they should leave Damascus and Aleppo and Cairo and go all of them to Lebanon? Why? What is the reason? What is the rationale behind this? We understand it as disintegration of our nation. And this is why we fought it. We didn't accept it. We fought it back and we refused to divide ourselves on confessional, sectarian, religious basis. That was the meaning and the message of the Ba'ath Party at that time. I'm talking about the message. Of course, the practice might be not as glorious as the theory. And that happened to all parties, all political parties all over the world. There were some problems, some failures, some fiascos. We know what happened to the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, for instance. I would say that the deviation of the message of the Ba'ath Party was somehow instigated by the challenges, the huge challenges we confronted in our area after our independence. Don't forget that in this area, after our independence, 1948 war, the first Arab-Israeli war, 1956, the tripartite aggression against Egypt, France, Israel, and Britain. 1967, another Israeli war. 1973, another Arab-Israeli war. 1982, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Then, etc. You know what happened in the area. So a huge accumulation of challenges did not give us enough time to digest the necessity to pass from theory into practice on the ground.
I'm going to open the floor for questions, though I have 3 more questions. I'm hoping that the floor will ask them. But I think we do at some stage need to know, firstly, what is the relationship between Syria and Lebanon? There is great confusion about this. Secondly, this incident in which some place in Syria has been bombed by Israel and nobody is talking. Why is nobody talking about something that has happened? There must be some reason. And finally, something which, Mr. Ambassador, may not have occurred to you, but there is trouble brewing on the border between Turkey and Iraq, because the Turks have decided today that they are going to hot pursuit against the Kurds in Iraq. Now, you have a Kurdish population also. I'd like to know what is the status of the Kurdish population in Syria. Is Kurdistan a problem which you see as an emerging problem or not? But these are just early warnings. The floor is open for questions from the floor. Nobody has questions? Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
What role is oil playing in all of this? And didn't the Western nations cause these problems by splitting everything up?
Oil was a catastrophe for us. I mean, for the Arab nation. All our problems stem from this issue. Actually, the division of the Arab nation by the British and the French in these famous secret agreements called Sykes-Picot had an oil background. And just an anecdote I would like to share with you. When these colonialist powers decided to divide the area, if you look at the map of the Middle East, somewhere between Iraq, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia, there is a small piece of land that belongs to nobody. They call it the neutral zone. It is full of oil. And now it is shared by Kuwait, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. Why is it called a neutral zone? And why it is not part of Iraq or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia? I will tell you the reason. It's very funny because that day, when the British and the French negotiators took their pens and started to draw the map, they had with them an Armenian guy, an Armenian businessman who works in the oil business. When they traced and delineated the borders of these new states, Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, whatever, the Armenian guy protested energically by saying, "And me, what shall I get from this deal?" Then they told him, they gave him a pen, and they asked him to draw the border of somewhere that will belong to him. He was so modest and humble and wise, so that he drew a very small piece of land that would belong to him. Actually, it is a desertic area. There is nobody over there. But these gentlemen decided the future of our land by themselves. They haven't consulted us. They even gave a piece of land to an Armenian guy because he used to work for them in the business oil. Until now, it is called the neutral zone. It belongs to nobody. We all know how the oil is important for the industrialized nations. It is now a very important nerve of the international business. We are not against using this oil, the wealth coming from the oil, to develop ourselves. But what's going on is that, first of all, the Arab countries are divided. Those who get the money from the oil are not those who suffer from the repercussions of this oil. Second, every time the oil producers accumulate certain amount of money, the day after, somebody come to them and say, look, we will sell you some weaponry for $60 billion or $50 billion. And then this is a vicious circle in the area where the whole wealth coming from selling the oil is spent on non-developmental business. This money is not used to develop the economies of the area, is not used to develop the education system or the social system, but rather to be spent on something that we don't need in the area. Why should we buy $100 billion weaponry every year? What for? We need a settlement to our disputes. We don't need creation of disputes in the area. So oil is a big problem, and Syria is not an oil producer. I mean, we are not like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or Iraq. We have a small amount of oil, enough to our local consumption. But we are not an oil producer. I mean, we don't get money from selling oil. I mean, a very small amount of money.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Could you explain, from the Syrian point of view, its relationships with three countries, and that would be Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan?
Let me start with Iraq. Iraq is very close to our heart. We attempted many times to strike a union deal with Iraq. Syria and Iraq wanted many times to unite together. The last attempt was done on 1979. We almost struck a deal, and we agreed on everything. At that time, Iraq used to be ruled by a president, the President al-Bakr, and Syria used to be ruled by the late President Hafiz Assad. They struck a deal at the Syrian-Iraqi border. Actually, that was in Baghdad itself. Saddam Hussein was at that time vice president. And Saddam had his own vision of Iraq. He didn't want to strike a union deal with Syria. But he didn't declare it. After our president left Baghdad, and I still remember at that time I was a young junior diplomat, we got instructions from our ministry saying that arrange with your Iraqi colleagues so that you choose the best embassy of the two embassies, the best of the two embassies, the best of the two residences of the ambassadors. We went so far, and we got instructions to do so. That means we were very close to make union with Iraq. Our president left Baghdad, The day after, Saddam gathered all those who were in favor of the unity with Syria, and he killed them with his own hands. He took them outside of a hall, a meeting, and he assassinated them with his own guns. So the whole project collapsed. And then, from that time, Syria closed its embassy in Baghdad. The Iraqis closed their embassy in Damascus, and until the American occupation of Iraq. Last year, we reopened our embassy. Why I'm saying this? At that time, we tried with Iraq to fill the vacuum created by Egypt after the Camp David Accords with Israel. Egypt was out of the Arab-Israeli conflict, so we decided to strengthen our force by creating a new political and military strong country, united country, out of Iraq and Syria to fill the vacuum created by Egypt. It didn't fly. But the background of this relationship between Syria and Iraq has a historical dimension also, because long time ago, almost 30 years after Prophet Muhammad passed away, the Arabs founded the first caliphate, Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus. Caliphate means an empire, if you want, something like this. Caliphate means successor of the Prophet. But it used to be a huge empire. Damascus at that time was the capital of a big empire starting from Morocco up to China. Damascus was the capital of this big empire. It survived, this empire survived almost 119 years. Then it collapsed. It collapsed and was replaced by another empire, which is called Abbasid Caliphate. And Baghdad was the capital of this new empire. So you see the background. The balance of power shifted from Damascus 1400 years ago to Baghdad. Then, along the history, the same balance of power used to shift once from Baghdad to Damascus, and then from Damascus to Baghdad. It's a conflictual relationship between the two countries, but conflictual politically speaking. It's not about wars between the two countries. Lebanon. And a final word on Iraq. We condemned the American-British occupation of Iraq. And we are still saying that this war is wrong. And that the American values are badly implemented in Iraq. And that the occupation of Iraq is giving a wrong picture of USA all over the world. We are still keeping the same stand. We haven't changed our mind. And this is why we have problems with the American administration. This is why they accuse us of letting these so-called infiltrators go through our border into Iraq, etc., etc.
But you should thank your stars that you are only a rogue state, because you are not empire of evil, at least. So you should praise God for the fact that you are only a rogue state.
Well, alhamdulillah, thanks God. Thanks God. No, I mean, we are not a superpower. We are a small country. We cannot control Iraq. Iraq is twice the size of Syria. We cannot be present in Iraq. We cannot control everything in Iraq. Iraqi people are resisting the occupation, not the Syrian people. This is the truth. I mean, this is a fact. George Washington did it one day. Was he terrorist? when he fought the British occupation of USA? He wasn't. This is what we teach to our children in our manuals. We teach them the values of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and President Wilson. We are not against USA. We are not against the American people. We love the American people. We are proud of this huge industrial civilization. We share a lot of outcome of this civilization, the technology, and we are not blind. We know what's going on in the world. But we are obliged to be at the defensive. And somehow somebody is asking us, obliging us, obligating us to share with him the results of his fiasco. Why should we be held responsible for the fiasco and the failure of these policies of the American administration in Iraq? Should we be blamed for the occupation of Iraq? We are not the ones who went there. You said Lebanon. Lebanon, as I told you, was a French idea at the beginning to create a Christian state in the heart of the Middle East. It didn't fly because the Lebanese themselves did not digest the idea. Of course, small minorities were collaborating with the French rulers at that time, but the majority of the Lebanese were against. Lebanon in 1944 wanted to join the Arab League. We were talking at the same time about founding the Arab League. It was founded, by the way, in the same year, 1945, with the United Nations. So the Arab League is one of the oldest international institutions in the world. At that time, we in Syria, we gave up, voluntarily speaking, parts of our territory, and we gave them to Lebanon to make Lebanon bigger and to break down this idea of having a pure religious, another pure religious state in the Middle East. And this is how the current Lebanon was created. Not only with what the French built up, but also with regions and areas we gave up, voluntarily speaking, from our own territory. This is why Lebanon has now a mixed population of Christians and Muslims. That gives you an indication that we have no ambition whatsoever towards Lebanon. Lebanon is very fragile sectarian society, very fragile. And people there owe their existence to their sectarian leadership. Everybody turns towards his leader, sectarian leader. They don't turn towards the state, the government. This is a culture. It's a Lebanese, purely Lebanese culture. People have affiliation towards their sectarian leaders. Due to that situation, the civil war started in Lebanon in 1976. Of course, there was the Palestinian presence in Lebanon, Yasser Arafat at that time. The Israelis and the Palestinians were fighting each other in South Lebanon. So the situation was very complicated. But when the civil war erupted in Lebanon and people started to kill each other, Washington, Paris, and London called on Syria to intervene and to save Lebanon. We did it. We did it because we were called to do so by the president of Lebanon at that time. And the Arab League supported our intervention in Lebanon. Actually, we entered Lebanon and we stopped the civil war. And history is there. And Washington thanked us at that time with Paris for having stopped the war. Only Israel has interest in seeing Lebanon turning towards religious strife. Only Israel, because Israel needs to see another stereotype created next to it based on the same approach, purely religious approach. We withdrew from Lebanon, as you know, in the year 2004. And from that moment, we withdrew from Lebanon because we were asked to do so by the Security Council and by the Lebanese. But that happened after the occupation of Iraq. And that was done because we were against the occupation of Iraq. So we had to pay the price of our stand vis-à-vis the occupation of Iraq. This is why we were asked to leave Lebanon. They wanted also to put an end to our regional role. Put an end to our regional role requires definitely and by definition getting the Syrians out of Lebanon, getting the Syrians out of the Palestinian equation, getting the Syrian out of the Jordanian affairs, getting the Syrian out of everything in the Middle East. This is the meaning of putting an end to our regional role. Everything going on in Lebanon right now against Syria is part of this background, is of this picture. They accused us of having assassinated the late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Honestly speaking, this man was our man in Lebanon. He was our man, the Syrian man in Lebanon. Why would we commit political suicide by killing him? Those who killed Rafiq Hariri, they did it because they knew that by killing him, they will get Syria out of Lebanon. And remember what I'm saying, because after a while, the full investigation undertaken by the United Nations would be known to everybody. And it will be proved that Syria had nothing to do with this. Just for your kind information, 2 days ago, a Lebanese newspaper, Al-Akhbar, published the confessions of the murderers of Rafiq Hariri. The murderers are in the Lebanese jail. They have been in the Lebanese jail for months, and nobody speaks about them because nobody has interest in alleviating the burden from on the Syrian shoulders. The murderers are very well known now, and they are in the Lebanese jail. And they confessed. And they said how they killed the man. But this is boycotted by the media because nobody wants that to be known.
Sir, you had a question.
You talked to us about the great history of the Syrian Empire, and after also the victim of Syria, of the colonialism. You talked about the Ba'ath Party, that means Renaissance. But you don't tell us that the Ba'ath Party significantly restricts freedom of speech in Syria, of press, of assembly and association. I quote you, you told us religion is not an issue for us. Religion lives together in Syria. And you also asked, why should Jews leave Syria to Israel? I will tell you, because in 1944, after Syria gained independence from France,
46.
yes, I'm sorry, there were attacks against Jews, boycotts against them, persecution of the Jewish population, And for years, the Jews in Syria lived in extreme fear. And until today, there are persecution. I know there is a community, little community of Jewish population in Syria, but there have today also persecution, like they are the only military with passport and identity cards are not a religion. And that's why I want also to know what do you think about that?
In other words, you're not a nice person.
I am a troublemaker.
Yeah.
My friend, up to 1948, we had 2 Jewish deputies in our parliament. 2. And that exceeds, at that time, the size of the Jewish community in Syria. The same goes right now with the representativity of the Kurdish population in Syria. The size of the Kurds in Syria give them the right to get 8 deputies in the parliament. 8. If we want to go through the Lebanese example, if we want to apply the Lebanese rules, we should have only 8 Kurds representatives in our parliament. Do you know how many Kurds do we have in the parliament? We have 31. Because we do not believe in this sectarian division of the society. You are competent, welcome. You are not competent, outside. Regardless of your religious background. This is my first remark. My second remark. If you go back in history, you would see that the Zionist networks existing in the Arab countries made a huge conspiracy to push the Jewish communities in the Arab world to emigrate to Palestine. I will just give you some examples. In 1944, Cairo in Egypt. In 1954, the Zionist connection in Egypt threw a bomb in a theater, cinema, in Cairo, and they killed dozens of people. Most of them were Jewish, watching a movie. To keep these people scared and to push them to run away out of Egypt. They did the same thing in Syria. They did the same thing in Baghdad. The one in Cairo is very well known case, known under the name of the scandal of Lafon. Lafon used to be the Minister of Interior of Israel at that time. He was the mastermind of this coup. They did it in Syria, they did it in Iraq, they did it everywhere in the Arab world, to push the Arab Jews towards running out of their countries. This is why we still have Jews in Syria. This is why. In the early 80s, President Carter intervened with us to let the last Jewish community in Syria to immigrate towards USA. They were 5,000 people at that time. President Carter asked us to let these people leave. We told them everybody who wants to leave is free to do so, providing that he will not get back. You take your decision to leave your country by your own will, you do it. But please, don't tell me 10 years after that you would like to get back. So part of the Jewish community decided to emigrate towards USA. Part of them went to Israel. And the remaining Jews in Syria are still there. Nobody is persecuting them. They have their own temples. They have their own religious places. And we are proud of them being part of our nation. Our nation is not a Muslim nation. I told you, we are proud of all our children, Muslim, Jews, Christians. This is their country, this is their land. But the problem is that all of these Jewish communities in the Arab world were a victim of a plot organized by the Zionist connections. Why they did this? Because they needed people in Israel. They needed what they call bringing the diaspora into Palestine so that they build up a new state of Israel in Palestine. That was the reason why they were behind every single Jew in the Arab nation, in the Arab world, to immigrate into Palestine.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Demonstration towards Iran about new Israeli air capabilities to get around air defenses. What is your explanation of what has happened and what really was bombed? Because we have not heard anything which is abnormal in any Israeli air situation.
Are you making a bomb?
A nuclear bomb.
Nuclear bomb?
Nuclear bomb.
I ask because I'm in the business and we've done it, so we want, we want to know whether you're joining our club.
We might need your help. Thank you for raising this question. Actually, what happened is that on September the 6th in the evening at 1:30 in the morning, 6 Israeli American-made aircraft, F-16, 6 Israeli fighter jets violated our airspace coming from the Mediterranean through the Syrian-Turkish borders. They penetrated very deep inside Turkish airspace until they hit an area named Tel Abyad, the hill of Abyad. From that area, they went down to the Euphrates River city called Deir ez-Zor. In this city, there is a center, an Arab center for the study of deserts, arid areas and desert. It's something, an Arab center to combat desertification, because this area is about desert. They were encountered by our air defense fire. So they turned back towards north, towards Syrian-Turkish border. Then they turned left, running out towards the Mediterranean. On their way, they dropped missiles. They dropped missiles at an empty building next to this center of combating desertification in Deir ez-Zor. When they were encountered by our air defense fire, they dropped also their fuel tanks in order to alleviate the weight of the plane, of the fighter jets, so that the speed would be higher. They were obligated somehow to run away. Then they had great interest in dropping the extra weight they had in these planes. This is what happened. I mean, this is the picture. Now, politically speaking, the Israeli kept silent 5 days. We didn't keep silent, and they were surprised by this. We raised the matter immediately in the United Nations by sending 2 letters to the Secretary General as well as to the Secretary General of the President of the Security Council, asking them to intervene to maintain peace and security, which is the noble mission of the United Nations. Both the President of Security Council and the Secretary General asked us to give them some time until they investigate. They asked the Israelis about the incident. They didn't give them any information. They asked the Americans, same. So there were no action taken by the United Nations until now. This is number two. Number three, when we raised the matter in the UN and everybody started talking about this Israeli violation of the Syrian airspace, some adamant neocon working within the American administration, very conservative people and very adamant vis-à-vis supporting Israel, such as Bolton, the former American ambassador to the United Nations, who used to be my colleague. He was the first to launch the idea or the justification of what happened by saying that the Israelis actually targeted a shipment of weapons that Syria wanted to send to Hezbollah in Lebanon. That was the first version of events. It didn't fly.
There's some very musical interlude out here.
So this is not yours. So it didn't fly, actually. The first version of events didn't fly very far. Then the day after, he changed his mind. He said, no, 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 no. The Israelis targeted a Syrian North Korean nuclear project somewhere in the desert. It didn't fly neither. The day after, he changed also his mind by saying, no, 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 that was a message to Iran. You know, you see, in 3 days, they gave 3 different versions, contradictory different versions on what happened exactly. Why raising the issue of this so-called secret nuclear cooperation program between Syria and North Korea? I will tell you why. Because it seems that the current American administration would like to bring USA into the club of the third world. Bolton is against Christopher Hill, the American negotiator who struck the deal with North Korea. Bolton is an enemy of Christopher Hill. Bolton is against striking a deal with North Korea, in principle. So he wanted to undermine this American-North Korean deal by mixing up the issue of the American-North Korean deal with the Middle Eastern politics, namely speaking with Israel and Syria, where the American public opinion wouldn't dare contradict him, because this is one taboo in the American society. Once you touch Israel, this is a taboo. So to undermine the deal struck by Christopher Hill, Bolton raised this issue of justification with regard the target of the Israeli aggression in Syria. Actually, we don't have a nuclear facility. Contrary to Israel, we are part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. Israel is not. We have agreement with the EAAE in Vienna, the International Agency for Atomic Energy. We put all our facilities under what we call the safeguard agreements of the agency. Israel did not. So we did everything required by the international law. The Israeli didn't do it. Israel has 300 nuclear heads threatening the whole area. 300 nuclear heads. This is why we are scared. And this is why we are calling for establishing a zone free from all weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. When we were member of Security Council in 2003, we submitted, officially speaking, a draft resolution calling for the establishing a zone free from all weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. We were contradicted by the American delegation. They threatened us to use their veto power. So the American administration is in favor of the proliferation in the area because they blocked an initiative in the Security Council to make the Middle East empty out of all weapons of mass destruction.
All the more reasons why you should agree with the Americans and build nuclear weapons in Syria. We have time for one last question. Yes, sir, you have the floor.
I would like to ask you a question that really not a lot of people have touched on since the Iraq War started. I wanted to ask about if you had any information about trafficking, whether it was labor or prostitution or anything of Iraqi people in Syria, what effects that's having, and what's being done to combat that.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. We have, currently speaking, 1,600,000 Iraqi refugees in Syria. They come to Syria, the Iraqi refugees come to Syria every day. Every day we receive between 2,000 and 3,000 Iraqi refugees from Iraq. They cross our border because they run out of fear for their own lives in Iraq. They are mixed. They are from all Iraqi segments, you know, ethnically speaking or religiously speaking or culturally speaking. Arabs, Kurds, Christian, Muslims, Chaldeans, Assyrians, you know, everybody. They don't turn towards Iran. They don't turn towards Saudi Arabia. They don't go to Kuwait. They don't go to Turkey. They come to Syria because they know that they will be well treated in Syria. Just for your kind information, we called on the international community to hold an international conference in Geneva in last April on this issue, asking the international community to help us, to assist us in dealing with influx of refugees coming to Syria. Syria is only 20 million people. Now we have 1.6 million Iraqi refugees. We have 500,000 Palestinian refugees. We have 500,000 Syrian displaced persons from the Golan occupied by Israel. Plus, we have a couple 100,000 of refugees from all Arab countries, Sudan, Somalia, you know, everywhere there is trouble, these people come to Syria because we do not require the obtention of a visa. Syria is the only Arab country that does not require Arabs to get a visa to enter Syria. So every Arab with his own passport can enter Syria. We didn't get one single penny from the international community. Not even $1 million. In Jordan, they have 750,000 Iraqi refugees. But the Jordanians are lucky because they impose the visa system and they select the rich Iraqi people only to get into Jordan. The poor Iraqi people go to Syria. In spite of this situation, the American administration, the Western European countries, the international organizations helped Jordan, but they don't help Syria for political reasons. So, in spite of the international pressure with this regard to help Syria, nobody is moving concretely speaking. Nobody is providing Syria with any assistance, with any help. Some NGOs, including some American NGOs, are involved. But we are talking about small amount of money and small amount of efforts. %10 of Syrian population is now out of refugees. 10%. Between 10 and 12% of Syrian population now is out of refugees. This is why we have tremendous bad side effects of this phenomenon in Syria. We never had in Syria a prostitution problem. Now we have it. Because these poor Iraqi women, they cannot find jobs in Syria. They spend their money and then empty-handed. We never had criminality in Syria. Now we have. We have 300 Iraqi children that should go to schools. Their parents cannot send them to schools. Then they are in the streets. Begging, killing, stealing, etc., etc., etc. The health system is fed up. Hospitals, etc., etc., etc. So we are suffering from this influx of the Iraqi refugees, but we cannot ask them to leave. They are our brothers and cousins. It's our duty, humanitarian duty, to welcome them, to help them protect themselves and their children out of this hell going on in Iraq. Unfortunately, we are alone. We don't get assistance for political reasons. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you, Ambassador, for walking us through. And I must say that I'm convinced now that you are a nice person, and I cannot understand why one person did not think you were a nice person. But may I request the Provost to come and close this meeting for this evening.
I'm sorry I couldn't touch all these.
Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us this evening and continuing the tradition of the pathways. Of course, thank you to Ambassador Kamal, who's always here to monitor everything, and I think this format worked very well this evening. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.